Three of Hollywood's biggest studios had the same script on their desks in 1973. All three passed. Not one of them was wrong about the data they were looking at. Science fiction, at the time, had a genuinely bad track record. They were wrong about which piece of that data actually mattered. The studio that finally said yes wasn't the strongest one in the room. It was the one willing to bet on the person holding the script, not the genre it was written in. In the spring of 1973, George Lucas wrote a 13-page treatment for a movie he was calling The Star Wars. He sent it to United Artists on May 7th. 3 weeks later, United Artists said no. The story felt too strange, and the $3 million budget he was asking for looked like a gamble on nothing. Lucas's contract gave Universal the next look, so the treatment went there next. Universal's own executives read it and landed on the same verdict from a different angle. One of them, Ned Tannen, is said to have liked the action but couldn't get past how the robots and creatures read on the page. Impossible to picture on screen, more of a technical headache than a movie. Universal had 10 contractual days to decide. They used every one of them, then passed. Disney read it too and passed as well. 3 studios, 3 rejections. Most retellings of this story only mention 2 of them. Not one of the 3 thought the writing itself was bad. 10 days after Universal's rejection, Lucas sat down with a Fox executive named Alan Ladd Jr. Ladd had joined the studio that same year as vice president of creative affairs, not a gatekeeper near the bottom of the ladder, but the person whose actual job was deciding what got made. He'd heard people raving about a small coming-of-age film Lucas had just finished and arranged a private screening before it even had a release date. What he saw convinced him the director was the real thing, even though the man pitching him was, by most accounts, still fairly shy and awkward in a room, nothing like the confident image people picture now. So when Lucas started describing his space movie, a farm boy, a princess, robots, an empire, Ladd's own account of that meeting is blunt. I didn't have a clue what he was talking about. He said yes anyway. Fox picked up the option on July 13th, 1973. Fox wasn't betting from a position of strength. The studio had nearly collapsed a decade earlier after an infamously expensive flop, and its balance sheet in the mid-1970s was still shaky enough that one more big miss could genuinely hurt. Ladd greenlit a budget of roughly $8 million, modest by studio standards, but real money for a genre with a poor box office history. A few weeks after the deal closed, the bet got its first piece of proof. American Graffiti opened in theaters. It had cost Lucas's team $777 to make. It went on to earn around $140 million. Fox hadn't even financed it. Universal had, but the message reached every office on the lot anyway. The director Ladd was backing wasn't a hopeful unknown. He was the guy behind one of the most profitable movies anyone had ever made. None of that made the next 4 years easy. There was no way to actually make the movie with the technology that existed in 1973, so Lucas's team built a visual effects company from scratch just to invent the tools the film needed, a company that's still doing that job today. The budget climbed past $11 million as a result. Location shoots in Tunisia ran into equipment failures and brutal desert conditions. Back at Fox, executives who'd never wanted the project in the first place watched the costs rise and pushed to shut it down more than once. Ladd kept fighting for it, mostly alone. When Star Wars finally premiered in May 1977, Ladd watched the first public screening from the back of a theater in San Francisco and, by his own account, welled up. Not because he'd known it would work, but because for 4 years he genuinely hadn't been sure it would. The film that almost died in the Tunisian desert went on to earn more than $775 million worldwide across its original run and re-releases. Fox's stock, which had been stuck below $6 a share the year before, quadrupled within 12 months. The 3 studios that passed didn't just miss one movie. They missed the first domino in a franchise that's since generated tens of billions of dollars in films, merchandise, and theme parks. And the treatment that started all of it was 13 pages long. None of the 3 rejecting studios saw a cent of any of it. They didn't just underprice the risk, they gave up any stake in the outcome permanently. There's a second decision buried in this story that matters just as much, and it's the one this channel actually cares about. When Lucas renegotiated his contract after Graffiti took off, he didn't ask Fox for more money up front. He traded a chunk of his directing fee for the merchandising and sequel rights instead. Fox's own executives thought they'd gotten the better end of that swap. Movie merchandising barely existed as a business in 1973. Outside of some plastic sharks sold alongside Jaws the following year, nobody in the industry had made real money off toys. Nobody in that room understood what they were giving away. Here's what actually happened inside those rejection meetings, as best as the record shows it. Nobody at United Artists or Universal thought Lucas was untalented. They were reading real data, a string of science fiction films through the 50s and 60s that had mostly underperformed, some badly. That data was accurate. What it left out was who was pitching them and what he'd already proven he could do with a much smaller, much stranger idea. Even the genre's one obvious counterexample worked against him instead of for him. 2001. A Space Odyssey had finished as the highest grossing film of 1968. Real proof audiences would show up for ambitious science fiction. But it had also confused plenty of the executives who sat through its early screenings, and some of them judged the film by their own confusion instead of by the box office number. It's a version of a mistake economists have a name for, anchoring on a sample that's already gone stale and mistaking your own reaction for the market's. There's a second layer to it, too. Saying no to an unproven genre isn't only a financial call inside a studio, it's the safer career move for the person making it. If a strange science fiction gamble flops, nobody remembers who passed on it. If it succeeds without you, that's a much quieter kind of failure than the one you'd have signed your name to. Caution protects the executive making the decision at least as often as it protects the company's money. None of this makes any one executive foolish. It describes an entire process that rewards agreeing with the last outcome over updating on the next one. Ladd read the same shaky track record everyone else did. He just weighted it differently. His own explanation years later was almost embarrassingly simple. I was behind it 100%, but no one else liked it really. He wasn't betting on spaceships. He'd already watched this specific director turn a tiny, unusual idea into one of the most profitable films anyone had made, and he treated that as the only data point that mattered. George Lucas put it more bluntly decades later, describing exactly what Ladd was underwriting. He invested in me, not in the movie. It would be nice to say Hollywood learned the lesson. It hasn't, not entirely. In 2025, Steven Soderbergh and Adam Driver spent 2 years developing a finished Star Wars script called The Hunt for Ben Solo, with Lucasfilm's own leadership genuinely excited about it. Disney's executives said no anyway. People close to Lucasfilm have said it was the first time in the studio's history that a completed script from its own filmmaking arm had been turned down at the top. Same industry, same franchise, 50 years apart, and the exact same shape of decision. A finished piece of work weighed against a general sense that this particular version of the story was too risky to greenlight. The backlash was loud enough that fans paid to fly a banner plane over Disney's own studio lot asking the company to reconsider. It hasn't been revived since. It isn't only Hollywood either. In 2000, Blockbuster had the chance to buy a small mail-order DVD startup called Netflix for $50 million and passed the same instinct, dressed up as sound business judgment. Blockbuster's data said rental stores worked. It just stopped being true while nobody at Blockbuster was checking. None of this is really about Hollywood. Every one of us reads our own version of that old data. A career switch that looks too unlike your last 10 years on paper. A market you've written off because of what it did the last time you were paying attention. A person whose new pitch you dismiss because you're still picturing who they were 5 years ago. The information isn't wrong, exactly. It's just old, and it's doing a job it was never built for, predicting something that's already changed since you collected it. The studios weren't punished for having bad instincts. They were punished for trusting instincts that used to be right. The real lesson isn't take more risks. Reckless bets fail all the time, for good reason. It's narrower than that. Before you trust a number, ask how old it is and what it stopped measuring the moment the world underneath it changed. 3 studios had good reasons to say no in 1973. They just never checked whether those reasons were still true. That single habit, checking the age of your own evidence, is cheaper than every mistake in this video combined. Quietly broke cover stories exactly like this one. Decisions that looked careful in the room and expensive in hindsight. So here's the actual homework. Name one thing you've written off, a plan, a person, a market, and check when you last actually looked at the reasons why. If the reasons are still standing, fine, leave it alone. If they're not, that's worth knowing before it costs you what it cost 3 studios in 1973. Tell me in the comments. What's one call you're still not sure you got right? If stories like this are useful to you, subscribe. There's a new one most weeks. This video is based on real, well-documented events surrounding the development of Star Wars 1977 and the 2025 development of Star Wars The Hunt for Ben Solo. Direct quotations are drawn from on-the-record interviews. Some connecting narration has been written for pacing and clarity. This video is for general educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not financial advice.